Let's talk of the plate tectonics theory. You can find copies of these slides at this web page, bit.ly/allo help, with all lowercase except h. Like all theories, plate tectonics theory provides an explanation of several findings. They were replicated and supported by plenty of data. Findings that we know, that we are comfortable with, that we have proven again and again, but we had no explanation for them till the plate tectonic theory came and attempted to explain them. So the plate tectonic theory is based on those findings, but then it becomes a theory only, like all theories, when it is supported by plenty of data. So it explains a lot of supported natural observations, and itself has to be supported by plenty of data. Now, what are the observations that were well supported before the plate tectonic came out to explain them? Continental drift, which is large-scale motion of continents relative to each other. So we see them moving slowly relative to each other, but this motion is happening all the time. We don't notice it, but we can notice the effect over a long periods of time. The other finding is that the continents are shaped like parts of a jigsaw puzzle. That's also an indisputable observation. Moreover, we find identical fossil records in distant continents. We find the same fossil record and layering of the rocks in North America and parts of Western Africa. That's seeing the same kind of fossil record and the same record layers suggests that maybe they were connected at some time. So that was a finding that people were aware of, but they didn't explain. Moreover, seafloor spreading in mid-ocean ridges as plates move apart. Essentially, it cracks the seafloor, and as they move apart, magma comes out from the mantle and cools down to form a new crust. That's what we call the seafloor spreading. The seafloor kind of getting bigger and bigger. And then also the most important thing, mountains, volcanoes, earthquakes, they mostly occur along what we call now plate boundaries. And they are, as we know now, based on that theory, due to plate tectonics. Now, there are a few exceptions. For example, Hawaii and Yellowstone Park have some volcanic activity that's not due to plate boundaries. They are not in plate boundaries, but maybe they were old ancient plate boundaries, but they are not currently plate boundaries. So we say that they are due to hot zones. We don't really discuss this in this course. Now, for the fun of it, if you'd like to learn more about plate tectonics, you can get some information here. But we don't need to get into that much here. So what are the types of plate boundaries? Let's focus first on this map. Whenever in maps they have things in blue there or bluish, that's going to represent ocean. So for example, here is the Pacific Ocean. But then the gray here is going to be land. The Eurasian plate, Australian plate, that's land. These lines here, they are either red or orange or black. These are the boundaries between plates. Essentially like the fence, the borders of those plates. Okay, in places like C, L, H, and marked here, and more unmarked places probably here, essentially whatever is drawn in black. To both sides of the boundary, the plates in this case are moving apart. They are moving away from each other. That's what we call divergent boundaries. The plates are divergent, moving away from each other. That's one type of plate boundary. The second plate boundary is drawn in orange here. Look at the arrows. This arrow tells us how the Pacific plate is moving, and this arrow tells us how the North American plate is moving in that location. And in this case, you see they are not pulling apart, they are actually rubbing against each other, sideswiping each other. We call that a transform boundary. Think of western the US, where California is and San Francisco is. Think of the large San Francisco earthquake. Now the others, whatever is done in red here, are convergent boundaries. Now these teeth here are representing what we call subduction zones. So this is a convergent boundary with subduction zones. That's, you see subduction zones associated with convergent boundaries. That's when the heavier, more dense plate gets under the less dense plate. For example, here the oceanic plates are usually more dense than continental plates, but in this case, even though we have ocean on both sides, the Pacific plate here is slightly more dense than the North American plate, so it kind of sinks below it whenever collisions occur. The outcomes of all of these boundaries are different. However, divergent boundaries and transform boundaries have only one type of outcome, so we don't separate them. For convergent boundaries, however, we have different outcomes. So when we say oceanic, we mean we have ocean on both sides. When we say oceanic continental, we are speaking of one side continent, like here South America, and one side ocean, like here. And we call it continental when we have continent on both sides. That's, for example, here in D.